Welcome back, friends, to a New World video that I've been wanting to record for a while now. This video is talking about the Gypsum Kiln over here, which are like these sort of blue well things that you can find in most of the end game settlements. So we have Brimstone Sands, there's also one in Reekwater, Ebonscale. If you guys haven't taken a look at them yet and you're level 65, if you've hit the end game, there is actually a lot of good items you can make in the Gypsum Kiln. I find a lot of people asking me, Baggins, how do I get some 700 gear score? How do I get good gear with the expansion? And obviously you can go and do chest runs, you can, you can do any content that you enjoy, but there is a good sort of way to fast track your progress and immediately get some 700 gear score items by crafting them in the Gypsum Kiln. You will need this materia stuff in order to make them, but for those of you not familiar or not aware, you actually get a lot of materia from the season pass. And before you say, "Oh, well, I gotta buy the season pass," no, it's on the free track up the top here. So for around like level 60 onwards, you start getting these boxes here, this Empyrean Forge Expedition chest, and that top line it says it contains 3,500 dense Empyrean Forge materia. And then if we keep going, we get these sort of like every 5 levels, and as we get closer to the end, they're very frequent. And these ones also contain dense mutator materia. Now, when you look at the Gypsum Kiln, you will need to sort of drop down the menus a little bit here. So if we go to Rise of the Ennead Replicas, this is where you can find all the items here, and they're sort of subdivided by different dungeons. So you can get this materia just by running the expedition as well. I believe it probably has to be the mutated version. Some of these items are very good, like for example, Soul Pollen. This has the potential to be a best in slot ring, and then other ones like Berry Pickers, not so good. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to go over sort of each dungeon category here, and we're going to talk about which items are worth crafting, what sort of builds they would fit into, and why I believe the perks are good. All of this is sort of based off of an internal tier list of like perks in my head, like Arboreal Conditioning I think is very situational and generally not very good, but then going down to Soul Pollen, Thrust Damage, Leeching, very good. So yeah, it's again, this is going to be my opinion. If you guys would like to see a sort of tier list of perks and I follow like a bigger deep dive on what makes items good in New World, let me know in the comments down below or leave a like. And of course, if you enjoy this sort of content, you want to support the channel, make sure you go ahead and click that subscribe button. I want to note that I also want to include in this video is I am sort of following a list that I've written out here of like all of the good items. So I guess if you want to pause the video and just take a look through these here. But this is also going to be up on our website as well. So it'll be in a nice sort of more visually appealing look. And that guide is going to be up on this website here. This is Player versus New World. This is a website that we've been working on for a couple of weeks now. We've got build guides over here. So we have our tank guide, which is actually still a work in progress, but I've got my healer builds over here as well. We have a little bit of a description about what the build does, perks that you generally want to be looking for on your gear, which artifacts I go for, my attributes and all of that stuff. And then we also have a gameplay guide for mutations in terms of what consumables I recommend you run per expeditions, what gems you should go for particular mutations. And like I say, this Gypsum Kiln crafting guide is also going to be on the website. So links to that in the description down below. And again, if you like this stuff and you want to see more of this, please consider supporting the channel just by subscribing. We don't run any ads or anything like that on the website, and that's just because you guys show such support. So yeah, if you like this and you want to be like, hey Baggins, this is really cool, just consider clicking subscribe here on the YouTube channel. Right, with all that like sort of promotion plugging out of the way, let's actually get into the video here. So starting off with the unique Lazarus Instrumentality replicas, there's not that many that I think are great to make here. We're not going to go over every single item because this would make the video take so long. So instead, I'm just going to pick out the items that I do believe are worthwhile crafting with the materia. The first one that's coming up is the Ritual of Hereafter. This is a life staff that has Refreshing Move and Fortifying Sacred Ground. Now, this is very similar to the life staff that I use in my sort of best in slot builds, or my favorite life staff build, which is Blessed, Refreshing Move, and Fortifying Sacred Ground. So we've almost got like all of the perks there. The third perk, obviously, that you would be looking to roll on this item would be Blessed or Savior. I think Savior is also pretty good. It's a bit more situational, but Savior is excellent as well. And I should mention, by the way, that if you get unlucky with the item craft, and you know what, should we just go ahead? Yeah, let's just send it. Let's craft this here, just for an example at the start of the video. Oh, we did. We got Savior. That's really good. So we got very lucky there. We got Savior, Refreshing Move, and Fortifying Sacred Ground. Nice. I've got an alternative. Obviously, this is going to be for healer builds, but if you did get unlucky there and you got like Keen or Vicious or something like that, what you can do is then just open back up the Gypsum Kiln menu here, and then we go all the way down to the bottom, and you will see the Ritual of Hereafter here in your named item crafting, unless you have equipped the item to your character. So if you equip the item to your character, you will have to sort of unequip it. So make sure it's off your character and sitting in your bag. And then again, if you go all the way down to the bottom here, you will see the Ritual of Hereafter. It says Refreshing Move, Fortifying Sacred Ground. Obviously, it's legendary, but you get to choose what perk you want to switch out. So if you did get Vicious, you could switch it over for Blessed or for Savior, but you would need a Weapon Matrix, a little bit of Dark Matter, 3 Chromatic Seals, which kind of sucks, and a Gypsum Orb. So ideally, you don't want to be doing this because it does cost a lot, but just to make you guys aware, there is an option to re-roll the perk if you do get unlucky and don't get, you know, what we sort of recommend in this guide. Now, I don't feel like we need to go into too much length as to why I believe these perks are good on Lifestaff. Obviously, this is for a healer build more than anything else, so if you're not a healer, you won't be interested in making this, but Refreshing Move is like a must-have perk on the Lifestaff. I think Fortifying Sacred Ground is one of the best weapon abilities because you use Sacred Ground in almost every single build as a healer, and then obviously Blessed or Savior, just extra echoing healing, kind of makes sense. Moving on to the next item, we have Passage of Time. This is an amulet that gives you Constitution, so it fits into a lot of different builds. It has Stamina Recovery, which I think is a best in slot perk for most builds. The Stamina Recovery is a really good perk. Refreshing, kind of not ideal, but the third perk you'd be hoping to roll in this amulet is Health, and I think this is an amulet that fits into kind of every build. It is something that you will replace later on, so if you're looking to make something best in slot, it's not quite Passage of Time, but it is a good amulet to get started if you can get that Health as the third and final perk. Finally, the last piece of gear that I think is worth crafting from the Lazarus Instrumentality Replicas is Stone Soul. This is a pair of boots that have Constitution, Health, and Shirking Fortification. Ideally, the third perk you'd be looking for is probably something like Refreshing. I imagine these would go nicely into a tank build, or you could play them in sort of a medium bruiser DPS, so something using like a Great Axe, a Great Sword, or a Warhammer. Shirking Fortification is generally something that you want to see when you have more armor, because Fortify increases your armor. So if you have a lot of armor to start with, then you get more value out of Shirking Fortification. And obviously, you don't really usually wear heavy boots in a light equip load unless you're using featherweight. So yeah, Health, Shirking Fortification, Refreshing, good for tank builds and good for various sort of melee in the thick of it DPS builds as well. One thing I should say before we go any further in this video is that this is generally aimed towards PvE. Some of these items will be a bit more PvP orientated, but generally a lot of the perks that I'm recommending here are PvE orientated. So in case somebody's like, Baggins, don't you think like Shirking Heals would be great here? Yes, Shirking Heals, but it's only for PvP, and we're generally looking more at PvE like expeditions and stuff for this video, just as a disclaimer. Moving down to the Garden of Genesis replicas, the first item in the list here that I recommend crafting is the Lifewell Channeler. This is a life staff with Blessed, Refreshing Divine Embrace, and then hopefully you would get the third perk, Refreshing Move, or potentially even Purifying Breeze, I think is what it's called. When you remove a debuff, you get to heal for a percentage. That would make it more PvP orientated. I do generally believe that Refreshing Divine Embrace is something that you're going to see a lot more in PvP, because you need that single target heal to bring somebody up quickly. Blessed kind of would be better if it was Savior, because Refreshing Divine Embrace wants to be used below 50%, and Savior kicks in when you're below 50%. But if you are in the business of using Refreshing Divine Embrace in expeditions or anything like that, this is a good life staff to go for. Like I say, Refreshing Move or Purifying Breeze I think would be both good as a third perk for healer single target life staff. Another item that is pretty awesome that you can get from Garden of Genesis or craft with the materia is Grove Light. This is a strength and dexterity amulet, so obviously catering more towards melee DPS, rapiers or spears or hatchets or sword and shield. Having the strength and dexterity does limit it a little bit, but yeah, any build that uses strength or dexterity, because you can remember you can just put 25 points into either of the stats, and sometimes that is good because you just get a little bit of a benefit. This has health and nature protection. Ideally, the third perk would be stamina recovery. As we talked about with the previous amulet, stamina recovery is one of the best perks to have there, but something like the one that lowers all your cooldowns when you drop below 50%, that's also really good as well. I think it's recovery something, refreshing recovery. Anyway, this is a good amulet to use in nature mutations, so if you're going into a nature mutation right now, I think it's our final day of mutated barnacles with nature, so this would be great here. Definitely a good pickup to start spamming, especially if the week that we're about to go into has a nature mutation. Highly recommend making this if you are a spear or a great sword or a hatchet DPS or anything like that. Genesis of Life, similar to Grove Light, dexterity intelligence instead of dexterity strength, so this is maybe a bit more catered towards a rapier build or something like that, but healing heart and regenerating, ideally with the third perk of Refreshing Toast or even Healthy Toast, can give you a lot of sustain. Healing Heart gives you a fairly decent burst heal when you pop your heart rune, and then regenerating to constantly tick your health over. Some people caution against using regenerating because apparently it can generate aggro when you're in PvE, so you might take more threat away from the tank, but I do believe the perks are pretty good, especially if you don't have any decent earrings. This is not a bad one to go for, provided the stats fit into your build. And then lastly, one of the best items that we can make in the Gypsum Kiln at all, but especially from the Garden of Genesis replicas, is Soul Pollen. This has thrust damage and leeching, and for rings, you always want to have that Hearty perk. Hearty is almost like mandatory for rings because it gives you access to a third dodge roll, or dodge in general, which is huge. So thrust damage obviously does limit this to being used with a bow or a rapier or a musket or a spear, and maybe even a blunderbuss, but not so much blunderbuss because it doesn't use dexterity. Anything that does thrust damage, in particular, like I say, bow, spear, rapier, I think this is the ideal ring. Hearty, a damage perk, and then leeching is great. Sometimes like Hearty, Keen, and leeching also good, but yeah, this feels like it's really wanted to be used with a spear or something like that. So absolutely awesome ring, provided you can get Hearty as the third perk. Moving down into the Ennead Replicas here, we have Soft Warmth. This is a life staff with Savior and Accelerating Light's Embrace. Now, in my opinion, this is very much catered towards PvP. Accelerating Light's Embrace is something you don't really care about in PvE unless there's some sort of fight in the future where we need a lot of movement speed. Generally, movement speed is much more important in PvP. You can use this on a teammate or yourself to get yourself in or out of the fight. Ideally, the third perk would be Refreshing Move or, again, Purifying Breeze. I'm going to check the name of that perk because I'm worried that I'm getting it wrong. It is called, yeah, Purifying Breeze. So you kind of need like Splash of Light or something to take advantage of this. But if you can make Soft Warmth and then you can lock in Purifying Breeze or Refreshing Move, I think this is a really good life staff option for sort of PvP healers in general. So Soft Warmth, PvP healer, pretty good pickup to like a craft that you can make here. Next up, we have Hippopotamidian Strength. I have no idea if I'm pronouncing that right. It has Vicious and Keenly Empowered, ideally with the third perk of Sundering Clear Out or Sundering Shockwave. It's not a best in slot Warhammer, but it is a pretty good Warhammer. So if you don't have anything good yet, I think Vicious and Keenly Empowered are okay perks on the Warhammer. I'm not going to say that they're, like I say, the best, but it's probably worth crafting if you need a decent Warhammer and you're not really interested in the artifact Warhammer or anything like that. Third perk, ideally, Sundering Clear Out is really, really good at 27% rend when you use the ability, or Sundering Shockwave, I think, is also acceptable as well. Next up, we have Life Loop. This is a Magnify earring, so Magnify, kind of a little bit disappointing, but as Healthy Toast, Refreshing Toast, and then I think the ideal third perk would be Healing Heart. This is a fairly decent earring that slots into many different builds because of the Magnify, but you do also want to be careful. Too much Magnify can poo-poo things as well. Regenerating would also be a fairly decent third perk, but you gotta watch out when it comes to, you know, tanks and if regenerating makes aggro. But yeah, Healing Heart, Refreshing Toast, and Healthy Toast, I think this is a pretty solid earring. I'd be happy if we could get that outcome. Then we have Coal Soul. These are medium boots with intelligence, refreshing, fire harnessing. Third perk, health is something you love to see in your gear. These would be pretty good for a mage build. Sometimes you have it, if you're using the attuned leather pants, for example, then you can get away with one other piece of medium gear. So you can use the medium attuned leather legs, and then you can use medium boots or medium gloves or medium helmet, and you keep a light chest. So this would slot nicely into a sort of mage build that's using the attuned legs with a fire staff, obviously. Yeah, it's not a bad item, provided you get health third perk, or like Enchanted Ward, I guess, would also be pretty good as well. Then finally, we have the Hearty Pants. These are medium legs, so these are a bit harder to slot into builds these days, because typically if you're going to go for medium legs, you would use them with, you'd use the attuned leather pants, but maybe there's some sort of breakdown where you could incorporate a piece of medium legs into here. Like if you were using like the Tumbler feet wraps, for example, which are generally more of a PvP item, then you could use the medium legs and then a medium pair of gloves and then a light chest and a light helmet. Health and Shirking Energy, two great perks. Third perk, like Refreshing or Enchanted Ward, would make this pretty solid for a lot of different builds. It does have Magnify, you gotta watch out for that. Magnify can sometimes make it hard to get the stats the way you want them, but I think they are worthwhile crafting for a few more specific builds that have a specific way they set up their armor. In particular, like I say, if you're using the Tumbler feet wraps, I think these would fit nicely into that build if you want to stay in a light equip load. When it comes to Tempest Heart replicas, honestly, I don't think many of these are very good. You can take a look through them if you want, but I don't rate any of them particularly highly. The first item that I came down here that looked okay to craft was Willpower. It's got Thwarting Strikes, which is good with the Warhammer because you do have grit. Quite often with the Warhammer, you can get grit on your heavy attacks, you can get grit with most of your abilities gain grit, and then it has Refreshing Moves. So if you just want to stand there and bonk, bonk, bonk to lower your cooldowns, I do see some tanks and players actively attacking with the Warhammer to lower their cooldowns, so you can just keep spamming the Warhammer abilities, which are quite powerful. I think ideally the third perk here again would be Sundering Clear Out or Sundering Shockwave. It's such a good perk to have on the Warhammer because it gives that big rend addition to the ability. And then the only other thing that I thought was worthwhile crafting from the Tempest replicas is Vivify. Now this is not a best in slot ring because you have to make the choice ideally for healers, and if you've not been able to guess yet, using Focus, Healing Breeze, Refreshing, third perk Hearty. We really need to have Hearty on our rings, but then it does mean that you don't have Sacred. You really would like to have Healing Breeze and Sacred on your ideal healer ring, and then you need Hearty as well. But I used this ring at the beginning of my healer journey before I was able to get a Hearty, Healing Breeze, and Sacred, so Hearty, Refreshing, and Healing Breeze is pretty good. Or if you're feeling super risky, you could go Sacred, Refreshing, and Healing Breeze, but either of those perks as an outcome could slot into a healer build, but you would have to upgrade this at some point in the future, and by upgrade I mean replace. From the Empyrean Forge replicas, I think there's a few worthwhile items crafting here. Commanding Strike is an okay great axe. It's not best in slot, but it is okay. It has Sporting Strikes and Keenly Jagged, which are two pretty good perks. If you're playing 300 con, or if you're particularly focusing on heavy attacks, because I think you can get grit with heavy attacks from the Great Axe skill tree, this is going to be okay. Refreshing Move would be the third perk I think you would generally want to see here, and this would slot well into several Bruiser builds if they're not using the Abyss Great Axe, that is. Then we have the Fire of Life, which is a Blessed Fortifying Sacred Ground Life Staff. This is actually the life staff that I use right now in most of my healing content. Refreshing Move is the third perk that you want to see with this one. But yeah, Blessed Fortifying Sacred Ground with Focus, it's a good life staff, and if you can get Refreshing Move, it's a best in slot life staff in my opinion. Then we have the Counterbalancing Boots. Now these are a little bit more on the fringe side of things. Grit Ward and Thrust Conditioning with Magnify. I believe these could work in some tank builds, but you'd really want to see that Health as the third perk. I believe because you have Grit Ward, it locks you out of getting Enchanted Ward or Elemental Aversion. So yeah, if you could get Health as the third perk, I think these would probably be okay for some tank builds. Thrust Conditioning is going to limit its sort of viability, but Thrust Conditioning is pretty clutch when it comes to fighting bosses like Scylla. She does a lot of thrust damage from Lazarus. Also, Ennead, which is the final boss of Barnacles, it can be good. And then even in PvP, because there's a lot of spears and bows, Thrust Conditioning can also kick in there as well. So I think for any sort of 300 con, bruiser, or tank build, these are probably worth looking into. Scaled Gauntlets are another set of heavy gloves with Enchanted Ward / Conditioning. Again, ideally the third perk is going to be Health, which I do believe is the most likely outcome in the sort of perk buckets loot table. So if you hit craft on these and you get Health, I think you're pretty happy. Again, they got Magnify, which makes it harder to fit into certain builds. / Conditioning in PvP, this is good against Serenity Greatswords. In PvE, there are a lot of enemies that do slashing damage, so this can kind of help you out as well. I'm not going to say they're best in slot, but I think for sort of people who are starting out their tank builds, these might be worth looking into, and even for some bruiser builds that are playing in a medium or heavy equip load and have a few heavy pieces in there, might be worth looking at as well. And then finally, from the Empyrean Forge side of things, we have Red Hot Slag, which is a Magnify ring that has Hearty and Bloodletting. Now, Bloodletting does limit this sort of viability in most builds, but Bloodletting in Rapier builds is really good right now. Rapier Ice Gauntlet is probably one of the strongest builds out there for sort of single target sustained DPS, so this is going to be pretty excellent. It could also work with spears as well, or the Butcher, I guess. The Butcher is the one-handed sword with all the bleeding stuff. So ideally third perk is going to be Keen Awareness, or you want to get Thrust Damage. I think those are going to be the two perks that work there, or maybe even Ice Damage, because if you're playing Rapier Ice Gauntlet, you're leaning more into the ice side of things. So yeah, Hearty Bloodletting, and then some sort of damage that is relevant for a build that would use Bloodletting is kind of what you're looking for. So I'm saying Thrust Damage, or even like potentially Ice Damage. I think I would actually be looking for the Ice Damage, because I'm leaning more into the, you know, putting a... I could show you real quick, actually, because, you know, this is going to be a build that we'll show at some point on the YouTube channel. I call it the Duelist build, but we have a Finisher Rapier here where we put the Frozen Gem in it, and then we've got an Ice Gauntlet here, and we basically use the Ice Gauntlet abilities, then we switch over to the Finisher and do a lot of damage. And I'm looking to get a... you can see we've got a similar ring here, Bloodletting, Hearty, and then the third perk, I think I would like to have that Frost damage, but Thrust damage would be pretty good as well. Now moving into Barnacles and Black Powder replicas, we have Heavy Chain. I'm actually not entirely sure if I'm going to recommend this, because I'm not sure how good Powerful Eruption is, but if you ever wanted to play a DPS flail, I think Powerful Eruption looks pretty interesting. It deals 10% increased damage per stack of impairment on the target. So you stack up a bunch of impairment, you hit them with Powerful Eruption, and in theory, it's some big burst damage. To that extent, I think something like Vicious to get the extra crit modifier would probably be pretty good here. I'm not 100% sure you should craft this item. I need to play around with it myself, but yeah, if you like the idea of flail DPS, which I don't really think is a great build right now, it might be worthwhile crafting heavy chain. I've seen some people in Twitch chat raving about this item and saying it's pretty good, so need to look around into it more. So yeah, be careful. There's probably better things you could spend your material on, but I am going to include this in the video, basically. The Captain's Rapier has Vicious and Keenly Jagged, which I think are okay perks for a Rapier. I think this ideal third perk for this Rapier would probably be Omnidirectional Evade. I do believe there's some sort of issue with the Evade build right now that I've heard from Rapier players, but assuming that gets fixed, Omnidirectional Evade, Vicious, Keenly Jagged, I think are probably a 3 decent set of perks, providing you're not using the finisher. I feel like most people using Rapier are probably going to be using the Artifact Rapier, but if for some reason you're not, Captain's Rapier with Omnidirectional Evade as the third perk probably would still be a pretty decent Rapier that you could craft. Oil Jar, I think, is a fairly decent bow. It has Enchanted and Flame Attunement. This is similar to the Syncretic bow that a lot of people go for, but the difference with the Syncretic bow that a lot of bow users use is that has, usually people put Arboreal Attunement. This already has Attunement locked in, and therefore you'd just be looking to get the third perk, Keenly Jagged. I believe that would make it a pretty solid bow for various bow builds. So Keenly Jagged, Enchanted, Flame Attunement, that would be the ideal outcome, and this would be a decent bow for PvP or PvE. Swapping Staff is a life staff with Purity of Light and Purifying Breeze. I think the third perk ideally would roll here as Savior. This would be for a Splash of Light build where everybody gets low in health, and then you do the clap. You get the big bonus heal, hopefully cleansing some debuffs. You heal yourself as well with Purifying Breeze, so a bit more of a meme or niche life staff, but if you really like Splash of Light and you want to lean into that, getting Savior as the third perk on this could be kind of interesting. Probably more of a PvP thing, because it's kind of, there's not that many things you can sadly cleanse in PvE, especially in mutations, but yeah, I think I'm going to play around with this at some point and hopefully get Savior. It might be kind of fun, but probably not the best thing you can craft with your Barnacles materia. Frosted Tips are a pair of medium gloves with Refreshing and Ice Harnessing. Third perk Health would be ideal here, but Enchanted Ward wouldn't be too bad. Obviously with Ice Harnessing, this kind of limits it to being used with Ice Gauntlet builds for the most part. But if you're using something like the Attuned Leather Pants with the Ice Gauntlet, then you'll want to have one other piece of medium gear. If you're staying in a light equip load, it would be like light helmet, light chest, medium gloves, medium legs, and then light boots and medium legs, Attuned Leather Pants. So yeah, for a Ice Gauntlet build using the Attuned Leather Artifact medium legs, these are probably not too bad, provided you get health as that third perk. And then finally we have the Privateer's Heirloom. This is Hearty slash damage, and the third perk you'd be looking for is Leeching. Hearty slash damage and Leeching is great for hatchet builds in particular. And the Greatsword, I've heard generally with Greatsword builds, especially with Serenity, you'd rather go for Keen Awareness over slash damage, but I don't think you'd be at a disadvantage. And again, especially if you're early on in your gearing journey, you've only just finished the season pass and you're looking to get a big boost in power, Hearty slash damage and Leeching would be a pretty solid ring for any build that's using a one-handed sword, a two-handed sword, a hatchet, or even a great axe, provided it's not the Abyss. This would also work well for several tank builds as well. A lot of tank builds use sword and shield, and increasing the slash damage, getting the Leeching and the Hearty for more block or dodge. All pretty solid perks that would complement that build. Now we have the Crystal Claw Caverns replicas, which is basically Savage Divide. I don't know how they haven't caught this, but at some point they obviously changed the name of the dungeon. I think it was originally going to be called Crystal Claw Caverns, but now it's called Savage Divide, which is the new expedition down in the bottom right of the Elysian Wilds. Not too many people running that because it hasn't been mutated in a while. There is a fairly decent fire staff you can get in here. It's got Keen, Empowering Fireball. Third perk here as Vicious, I think would be okay. If you wanted to custom craft, I don't believe it can actually be an outcome, but you could add it on later. You could add on Flame Attunement. I think that would also be pretty solid as well. And maybe even Enchanted. I don't rate Enchanted too high on the fire staff, but Keen, Vicious, Empowering Fireball, I think that would be a pretty good outcome. And I believe that's the most likely outcome because Vicious is like 20 to 25% of the time that's what's going to pop up there. So fairly decent fire staff to get you started in your sort of mage journey. We have the Fist of Kurok, which is a Warhammer that has Trenchant Strikes and Refreshing Mighty Gavel. So if you're using Gavel in your build, Trenchant Strikes is great on the Warhammer because it is pretty often that you sort of drop a stun and then you go for a fully charged heavy attack, and getting 23% extra damage on that is pretty awesome. Sadly, by having Refreshing Mighty Gavel, you can't have Rending Clear Out, or what is it? Sundering Clear Out? Yeah, Sundering Clear Out or Sundering Shockwave are locked off because you already have a weapon perk on there. So Keenly Jagged or something like that would probably be the ideal third perk outcome for several tank builds or Bruiser DPS. It's not best in slot because, again, Sundering Clear Out or Sundering Shockwave I think are really the perks that you want to have on the Warhammer, but probably worthwhile crafting if you just need a decent pick-me-up Warhammer that's 700 gear score. And then lastly, from the Barnacles, not Barnacles, the Crystal Claw Clav and Savage Divide, we have Mammoth's Revenge, which is an intelligence earring with Healthy Toast, Nimble, and then probably third perk, Refreshing Toast or Healing Heart. Nimble, I don't really rate that highly as an earring perk. I don't think it does too much, to be honest. It's such a small thing, but you know, if you need a 700 gear score intelligence earring to bump up your average gear score for doing mutated expeditions or something, it's not a bad craft. And I haven't really found too many intelligence earrings lately, but maybe that's because of the loot biasing system where it just offers me, you know, gear based on what I'm currently wearing. I think it's an okay pickup. I have been using this in some mage builds because I don't really have too much else to use currently. All right, now moving down into the mutated named replicas, there is quite a lot of stuff here, so we are going to like sort of quick fire through this. I think the Ice Gauntlet is probably worthwhile crafting for some mage builds. You got to be careful because all of this stuff does have magnify, so the more pieces you make of this, the more awkward it is to get your stats in a particular way. We can maybe do a separate video on Magnify if you're not familiar why it's kind of problematic, but anybody who's been playing for a while will realize that Magnify does kind of screw your build up a bit, so be cautious crafting these. But Keen, Vicious, and then something like Unending Thaw or Pylon Burst I think would be great for anybody looking to put Ice Gauntlet into their build. From the Void Gauntlet standpoint, Keen, Vicious, Refreshing Move would also work well in some Mage and Healer builds. Again, you're probably going to be replacing these later on, but they're not bad pickups to sort of bump up your average gear score and start getting into mutated expeditions, especially since you get so much mutated materia. So Keen, Vicious, Refreshing Move. On the Rapier, Keen, Vicious, and then Keenly Empowered I think would make this a decent Rapier to get started with. Likewise with the Firestaff, also Keen, Vicious, and Keenly Empowered would make this a fairly decent beginner Firestaff, or Keen, Vicious, and Empowering Fireball, just like we have with the Madhouse, would be acceptable as well in my opinion. Now all of this Azoth Crystal stuff, there is a heavy, a medium, and a light version. So if you have Azoth Crystal Breastplate and Azoth Crystal Gauntlet, so this is the heavy stuff, then further down there's the medium and the light. Ideally I think the third perk is always going to be Health Enchanted Ward, and Refreshing is a solid set of perks to sort of slot into any build. Obviously you want to be careful you don't go over that refreshing cap. 4 refreshing perks at most is what you want to see, and it does have Magnify, so again watch out for that. But to fill in a few pieces of your gear that are kind of lacking, I think crafting some of this stuff, you know, I can make potentially 8 of these now. So one of them is likely going to be Health Enchanted Ward and Refreshing, and it's not bad, you know. Again, it's not the best. It's got Magnify. You will replace it later on, but again, to bump up that average gear score, to get your sort of gearing journey started, I do think making some of this stuff probably worthwhile. Don't fill every slot with it, but any pieces that are particularly lacking in your build, if your gloves are particularly low gear score, maybe take a look at the Azoth Crystal hand covers, which are the light ones, or the gauntlets, which are the medium ones. You guys get the idea. I'm not going to keep talking about this too much. The Empress Zhao stuff is like an alternative to the Azoth Crystal. This has Health and Refreshing rather than Refreshing and Enchanted Ward, so you've got again another 2 great perks there that are awesome to see. This is only available in light, but I think for healers, mages, any sort of light DPS, Health, Refreshing, and then third perk Enchanted Ward, or a weapon perk that matters for your build like Mending Protection, Fortifying Perforate, Refreshing Torrent, Relentless. You guys get the idea. I think these are also worthwhile looking into. Make sure that you don't fill your whole build with them unless you don't mind Magnify that much, but these are definitely worthwhile crafting. I am using a few pieces of the Empress Zhao gear in several of my healing builds right now. And then lastly, the only other thing that I think is particularly worthwhile making, there are some interesting pieces in here, like Elemental Aversion, Ice Harnessing could work for some Ice Gauntlet builds. You know, you guys can kind of take a look through and see if anything works well here. Void Harnessing can be good for Abyss as well if using the Abyssal Great Axe you want to lean into the void damage. But one item that stands out to me that is definitely worthwhile crafting is the Azoth Crystal Ring. This has Hearty Leeching, which are 2 solid perks to have on the ring for any DPS or tanking build. And then getting the third perk is Keen Awareness. I'm just going to make one now. Let's just see what we get, because these are generally pretty good. Purifying Heart, okay, that's a bit of a disappointing one there. Okay in PvP, I guess, but I think Hearty Leeching and Keen Awareness, Hearty Leeching and slash damage, Hearty Leeching, thrust damage, fire damage, frost damage. You guys get the idea. These rings are very flexible, and it's probably worthwhile making a few, because again, they got Magnify, but they do have 2 great perks to start with, and the third perk is going to be dependent on what you want to see in your build. Even Hearty Sacred Healing Breeze, Hearty Sacred, Hearty Leeching, Healing Breeze, Hearty Leeching Sacred would be okay to start off as a healer. So I think these rings kind of fit into every build, and this is probably the most worthwhile piece crafting from here. It does have Magnify, but it's pretty good as well. Alright, so that is the rundown of all of the items that I think are worthwhile making in the Gypsum Kiln. Again, if you think I missed anything, let me know in the comments down below. It is definitely worthwhile taking a look through there and seeing if there's anything you guys particularly enjoy. For me, as I mentioned at the beginning of the video, this is based on my own sort of tier list and internal ratings of perks in the game. If you would like to see a further deep dive, or almost, yeah, like a tier list of perks for PvE and New World, for armor, weapons, jewelry, let me know in the comments down below. Leave a like on this video. If we get enough likes, you know, engagement like that, then I know that clearly you guys enjoy that sort of concept and we can make that video. But with that being said, I think this video has gone long enough, so if you want to continue the discussion in the comments down below, or hop into the stream. We're live playing New World almost every single day. Links to the stream in the description down below, and you can get a recap of this full sort of build in a visual breakdown with text and stuff over on Player versus New World. Links to that as well in the description down below. But as always, if you guys enjoyed this video, make sure you go ahead and click the like button, subscribe for more, and I'll see you guys all in the next video.